So good evening, everyone. If I can just begin by asking all participants to please use their microphones when speaking, as the meeting is being webcast. And if we could start with the very first item on the agenda, which is the appointment of Vice Chairman. So does anyone have any nominations for the appointment of the Vice Chairman?
I'd like to nominate Councillor Swainston.
Thank you. And do we have a seconder?
I'd like to second that.
Thank you. All those in favour, oh sorry, are there any other nominations? No. Thank you. So all those in favour? Any against? No, so thank you very much, Councillor Swainston. I'm sure you'll be, all your expertise will be extremely valuable on this committee.
Thank you.
Right, so just to say a couple of things very briefly. Obviously, this is the first meeting of the new administration. So welcome everybody. I know we've got lots of experience on this committee, and I'm sure that's going to be really, really helpful as we go through the cycle. Obviously, it's so, and also I'd like to say thank you very much to the officers for all of their work in preparing all the papers, which are very detailed and informative. So that's very, very helpful indeed. It is obviously, you know, without people, there is no organisation, there is no council. So it is a really key part of our work. Okay, so moving on. So the next item is apologies for absence.
We have apologies from Councillor Hollybon, and Councillor Buckmaster is kindly substituting for her.
Now, the minutes, as I understand it, the minutes of the last meeting, we have got no members here who were present at the last meeting. So with your consent, what I'm proposing is that to be completely correct about it, that I go away and watch the meeting and bring back the minutes for approval at the next meeting. And if anybody else obviously wants to take that opportunity, they can also do that. So do I need to ask for? No, is everybody happy about that? Yeah, lovely. Okay, good. So this is item number 5, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? No, thank you. Okay, so moving on to item 6, the safety committee minutes. In the normal course of events, these minutes are minutes from the safety committee are just for noting and don't require members to vote. I thought it might be useful because this is for several of us anyway. This is the first time that we've come across the safety committee minutes, to ask Simon just to outline a little bit about the remit of the safety committee, so that we can understand why they're presented to us and who's you know, who's on that committee.
Thank you, Councillor Carter. So the safety committee is not a committee like all of the other committees, is the first point, i.e. it's not a member committee. Safety committees are set up under health and safety executive law. Essentially, if you have two I think it's union reps, but 2 members of staff that say that they want a safety committee set up. You have a 3-month period in which to set up. Our safety committee was set up years ago, certainly long before my time here. The membership is therefore a union and management split. So it works similarly in some ways to the local joint panel that you're probably aware of is a member committee. And I'll explain a bit more about that in a second. So it's officers and members of the union, the safety representatives, the branch. You try and get a fairly even split between union and management, but we also make sure that we have contract managers for all of the outsourced areas, talking about what's going on with those services, because obviously we still have responsibility for health and safety there, and likewise with the projects and the construction development. So everything that you would have seen in the health and safety report is very similar to what will be discussed at the safety committee. We do normally try and get this report to safety committee before it's come to you, just in terms of timing. That does then mean that the minutes of the committee are fairly reflective of the same report with maybe a few updates. How does safety committee fit in with HR committee, I guess, is the next question. And in short, HR committee has a responsibility for monitoring health and safety, which you would have seen in the terms of reference for the committee. So that's why you receive these detailed reports about what's going on in terms of health and safety, accidents, incidents, health and safety initiatives, etc. The other role of the safety committee is to work alongside the leadership team to review, approve and develop health and safety policies. Now, in difference to HR policies go to local joint panel, and the union and management agree the policy there. We do normally agree all outside of the room first, but this is the official signing off stage, because obviously you're working up an agreed draft and then that agreed draft is being approved. So the difference there is it then goes from local joint panel to HR committee to approve. In the case of health and safety committee policies, they go to safety committee and leadership, and safety committee effectively recommend the updates to leadership committee. It gets signed off. Then it comes to this committee, HR committee. So the slightly, well, it's not bad news. We've just reviewed all 23 of the health and safety arrangements, including the terms of reference, the statement of intent and the organisation and responsibilities. The statement of intent and the organisation and responsibilities used to go to full council as part of the policy framework, but there were too many policies on that framework and it was felt that they could go through the same channel as other policies. So that's just repeating myself again. It's safety committee leadership team from an officer union level that there's agreement, and then assuming that's reached, it then progresses on to HR committee to approve and adopt. Obviously subject to any amendments. If you make amendments at HR committee, it does potentially open up the prospect that we then need to go back to the union to check things out, but that doesn't tend to happen too often, but it is a possibility. The other thing that is a possibility with safety committee, and this is the last point, is that if we are unable, management and union, and obviously that also includes leadership team and their involvement. I chair the safety committee, sorry, is what I should say. We will do that all on email, the agreement on policy, and work that all through, and then it will be signed off. If for any reason management and the union cannot agree, it can be deferred to local joint panel, and then you go through the local joint panel route to get to HR committee. But HR committee is the approving body of health and safety policies. As I say, a couple used to go to council, they don't now, they come here. We've just done a massive review. A few were slightly behind on the 3-year cycle. So you may end up with 23 policies at your next meeting, but we will make sure that they are very, small details about what changes have been made. The policies will be available, but rest assured, we will be telling you what changes have happened, and there aren't huge changes. These are arrangements for how you act in a safe way. They don't tend to change a lot, but roles and responsibilities might, for example. Does that make sense? Any questions on safety committee, or have you got enough of a gist on it? Because people do struggle because it's called a committee. Well, where are the members then? But it's, as I say, born out of health and safety legislation, not out of our constitution. And the join to our constitution is yourselves. Yes, Councillor Connolly.
I'm not sure if I can ask this, but from what you've just said, can't say I followed every bit of it.
Okay.
On section 6.2, there's a mention of a survey of bridges and a bridge, Marshgate Bridge, which has some structural integrity issues. How-
Potentially, because
Okay,
you won't know until you do. But yeah,
Okay, it doesn't say potential in the document.
at the committee, the concern is it's the only access into Hartham. And if there are issues in the bridge and there is degrading, then the owner of the bridge needs to take some responsibility for that. So what the committee, because I remember this point without looking at 6.2, luckily, although I can't go there, essentially agreed to check the ownership again with the assets team, which have previously done that, and to contact the owner and ask them to carry out a structural survey. It's, from what I understand, it's the stuff you can't see inside the bridge that could be degrading. So sorry, that's why I was saying we don't know 100%, but a structural review was suggested. Obviously, with not owning the bridge ourselves, we can't force that matter, but it has been passed on to the appropriate team to raise.
And is that tracked through the Health and Safety Committee on a quarterly basis as an action?
Because it's in the minutes and there is an action in the minute, yes, we will look at that at the next meeting to say what's happened.
I don't know if you remember, there's a history of a bridge closing on Hartham Common, which caused mayhem.
Right.
And for that bridge to close would be quite.
That was why Ian Sharrett, the officer who raised the matter, is that is the only access. And so if there is a problem with that, it will cause serious problems. Yeah.
I don't know if we can capture.
I mean, I'm not sure why anyone privately owns a bridge and it's necessarily going to spend time refurbishing it and all the rest of it. So I don't think this is going to be an easy matter, but it is something that, as I say, at this stage, the problem hasn't shone out. It's a concern that we're trying to get ahead of.
Sorry, Councillor Connolly, were you asking for that action to be sort of tracked through, to be reported back to us?
I'd like to hear about it again. Yes, please. To hear what the outcome is. I do have some concerns. I did look up the road today and the road is not adopted. So I think you may have a challenge on your hands. So yes.
I mean, what I would say is Safety Committee are the ones that are looking after that matter.
Yeah.
So you're absolutely right, because it's in the minutes of the committee and there was an action to establish ownership and to contact the owner. There will be a report back at the next meeting and you will see the next minutes. So it won't be something that we add into a report for yourselves, but it will be part of the Safety Committee minutes, which is why you receive them. So you'll be able to see that it's being monitored. And I think you've helpfully explained the point that I didn't explain, is part of the reason why you received the Safety Committee minutes is so that you can see there is a Safety Committee and these things are being looked at.
Yeah. Councillor Buckmaster.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just say I'm really pleased to see the election duties paragraph in here, because I personally was extremely concerned about the number of hours all your officers were working, having been there on the Thursday night and on the Friday. You know, they were just so tired. So I do feel you do need to look into this, get guidance for the next.
Yeah, I've raised it to both the returning officer and to the monitoring officer. To be fair, that's all I can do at this stage, because the returning officer is the main decision maker. I think certainly something that was coming out is that we don't want people that have worked on a poll station all day to be involved in an evening count. And there is also an option to postpone the count to the following morning, which other authorities did do. So watch this space. I've fed the concerns in. There wasn't any near misses or accidents, but yeah, and there's also something called the working time directive that we should be complying with. Okay.
Councillor Smith.
Sorry, at the risk of repeating what Councillor Connolly has said, but I did have a note on here for myself to just mention about the bridge as well. And I think it's really important that we, I get what you're saying, that it's with a committee, but it's a really busy bridge and I'm really concerned. It's not like a little quiet part of the park. It's a very, very busy thoroughfare, which my children are probably playing on as we speak. So I think it'd be good to know who the owner is, because some work has already been done on it since the previous issues were identified. Somebody has done some work to it.
My understanding, I don't work in the assets team, but my understanding what came from the meeting is that, is it Anna Osborne? Yeah, Anna Osborne, who looks after that team, had looked up and had established ownership. But what we asked is, well, can we re-establish that, make sure that is the case, and can we contact the owner to ask them what they're doing with the bridge in terms of a structural survey? So that's where it's at. I can't, because we don't own the bridge, it's difficult for me to say anything more than that at this stage. But, and I'm stressing again, it was for the same reasons I think that you've just said. It's because how common used the bridge is, and also that it's the only way of accessing for certainly vehicles. Yeah, it was trying to get ahead of the game, as I say, in terms of actually, can we make sure this is okay and is being looked after?
And when would the next, when would the date of the next meeting be that this would be followed up?
We
Do
meet,
know?
I don't have an actual date off the top of my head, if I'm honest, but we meet on a quarterly basis. But I'm also happy, I think on this basis, because it has been raised, that maybe what I should do is actually take this away and ask for an update and then email the committee with an update. I think that would be the most appropriate thing to do, because then you can see you're not waiting to the next minutes. May also be the added nudge that will be helpful. I don't know. So I'll send that to the whole, I'll send it to Michelle, and Michelle will pass it on to the committee. Yeah. So that was the Hartham Common Bridge.
Are there any more comments on those minutes? Okay, so I think we don't need to do any more than just note them there. We don't need to vote on that. Okay, so we're moving on to item 7, which is the Health and Safety Annual Report 2022-23, including Q4 summary, pages 31 to 50. And again, if I can hand over to Simon here to introduce the report. We will debate it afterwards if there are any questions, and then there's a recommendation to consider it.
Thank you, Chair. So as stated before, Peter Dickinson would normally take you through the report. It may be, not guaranteeing this, but it might be that if you have some questions, I need to take those away and come back. But the reports do go through me, so I'm fully aware of everything that's in the report and hopefully can answer your questions. As you will see, the report, unlike other reports, it is quite detailed, but if you're going to ensure that you've covered all the different service areas, you do need the detail. Having said that, if any members going forward feel that there's detail in here that they don't think they really need to see, we can look at that. We've also developed an executive summary so that you can get reassurance by at least reading the summary, and then obviously delve into the details should you wish to. So I'm just going to whiz through the executive summary. And the first point then is to confirm that there has been no reportable accidents. What do we mean by reportable accidents? What we mean by that is where they have to be reported under the requirements of RIDDOR, which is covered further down in the report. It's basically on the level of accident and the impact that the accident has. Then they need to be reported to the health and safety exec. There have been no accidents that have met that criteria. In terms of non-reportable, it doesn't mean that we don't record them. It's just they're non-reportable to that RIDDOR. And again, there has been no accidents, no serious accidents in the non-reportable in the year or in the quarter. In terms of contract compliance and monitoring, there's been no safety incidents or site accidents that required further investigation. In terms of our contract side, in terms of our capital projects, again, there's been no recorded on-site accidents or incidents recorded for the period. Our own premises and sites, there's been no serious accidents. In the parks and open spaces, the lone working contract has been replaced, and we previously had a contract with an organisation called PeopleSafe. They've rebranded to be called Skyguard, so it's actually the same organisation, but we've got improved lone working devices, and the report later on talks to you about what a lone working device is. It's essentially a device that you carry, and should the device drop, it sends off an alarm, which effectively and you'll excuse the gender term, but they call it man down. So the man down alarm goes off. I'll call it person down if you prefer. What it also ensures is that you can track from a GPS point of view where somebody is, and obviously therefore get assistance to them. You can turn a microphone on without people knowing, so you can start recording the conversation that you're having, which might involve raised voices that will alert the person listening on the other end that there's an incident. So that's what the lone working devices are about. And they're issued to people that work in the field, and they also have to check in and out with their manager as well. In terms of COVID blended working, the last bit on the summary there, we've obviously been through, we had lots of office protocols, and they got redeveloped over time. It's now living, with COVID as such as the government referred to it. We've carried on with blended working. There's been a review of that, and we're currently drafting a policy. And then the other bit of reassurance is that display screen equipment assessments have been taking place at home, and making sure that people have the appropriate equipment and working environment at home. And then just finally, because I did want to mention safety committee, which has been mentioned in this report as well, just to sort of share, because you would have seen it and it fits with sustainability as well as good health and safety, is that we've got the e-car fleet, and you will have seen that they've all been nicely badged so that they're highly visible, because that was an issue to start with. And we're currently looking into whether we can get an e-van, which will then be able to house dogs, which you can't house in a car. The lease company won't let you, and the door doesn't open and close properly on the cage, etc., etc. So we're looking into that as well. And they're, being well used. So I just thought that was a good thing to highlight. And the rest of the paper effectively goes into more detail on all of the stuff that I've just covered. And just to bring your attention to, so each quarter we report, and then when we do quarter four, we do an annual report. And you'll see in this year's annual report, you've got the quarter four summary around accidents. If Hertford Theatre was open, that would go into the open spaces, members of the public section, unless it was an employee accident, and then it would go in the employees, in case anyone's wondering. And the big reassurance to give you on the annual statistics is, although there have been some increases, that's very much to do with footfall, i.e. because we were redeveloping Grange Paddocks and also Hartham. And obviously we also had in the early stages, certainly in 21, Brexit restrictions, so not Brexit, COVID restrictions, my apologies. So, and should you wish to look back on any of the previous quarterly reports, you will see that there's been no patterns or issues to learn from. And if there has been, they've been looked into and things have been changed. But what we always want to reassure the committee is the accident numbers are not out of kilter with expectation. You would have read in the report, it's very hard to get decent benchmarking data because facilities are very different. Often at this committee, we get asked, why is Grange Paddocks so much higher than everything else? Well, hopefully you will know it's quite considerably bigger than any other of our leisure centres, particularly the shared pools, but also Hartham. So yes, it will get more accidents. And if you read we always give you some detail on the accidents. It's slips, trips, it's somebody eating food that's too hot and burning their mouth. It's very much, I think there's a phrase where it's an individual matter rather than because of a hazard that hasn't been tackled. And if there's any questions on the report, I'll be happy to take them. If there is any detail that you feel is overboard, again, happy to take that on board.
Councillor Buckmaster.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Simon. A very good report again. And obviously, as probably the only one here who's been at previous HR
Yes.
meetings, I can actually say that yes, those figures in the quarterly reports are in line with other years,
And they are explained each time, aren't they?
exactly. So yeah, I was actually perfectly happy with all those figures you said. The only thing, and this is really just a very minor query, when you talk about the chairs that you had to replace, did you replace all of your chairs, or only the ones that were found to be, I think it was the 71 or something, that you identified as no longer fit?
Yeah, the chairs that were still seen as fit for purpose were retained. We work for a council, I would remind, sorry. But yes, no, we've definitely only replaced the chairs that needed replacing. But we importantly have got a much better deal on chairs, full stop, and the chairs are very malleable to the user, which works very well from a hot desking point of view. I think it'd probably be fair to say that we've maybe purchased overboard sometimes on some specialist chairs in the past, but we're on a purchasing framework getting really good value and good chairs. I'm using one of the old ones, if that helps.
Thank you, thank you. Can I just follow up with that? I've just wondered what happened to the old chairs, whether they're recyclable in any way.
I I believe some that were sort of semi okay were offered to staff potentially for a token gesture is what I understood, but most were recycled because they were condemned as such. Yeah.
Sorry, they were able to be recycled.
Yeah, they were taken with the recycling, their plastic and so on. So yeah.
Thank you very much. Sorry, Councillor Connolly.
Just one point I noted, and it may be because I'm getting confused with the annual report and the quarterly report, but in the Parks and Open Spaces management of this document, 9.1 said there'd been no incidents involving councils, ground maintenance contractor Glendale. But in 6.2 of the health and safety report, the last one, it talked about a cable incident that they cut through a cable that cut off some power in Hartham. And then it said that there was nothing particularly needed investigated. That sounds quite a serious instance to me.
The timing of the period, I believe that took place in April, and therefore it was reported at the safety committee.
Right.
Yeah, the cable had been put in by a different consultant, whatever the phrase is, different supplier, and they hadn't marked it up sufficiently. So the remedial action was to ensure that all cabling like that is marked so that that doesn't happen again. It didn't cause any issue. It just meant that the cable needed to be repaired, but that has been resolved.
Okay, so it looked like it was missing because the first report is January to March. And so that wouldn't include the information.
Yeah, so that
Right,
I need to find 6.2, but this came up at the safety committee, I believe.
Well, it was in those health and safety minutes. That's
Yeah, so yeah, it came up at safety committee, which was held after the period.
I'm confused with the date.
Right, let me just get
I
my
thought
grip
the
on this.
first quarter was January to March, and then this annual report was March. to
Quarter
March.
4 is January to March. The whole period is a financial year, April to March. 22-23. I just need to look at, yeah, if it's an error and we need to capture it in two parts of the report, I'll establish that. Apologies. 6.2 you said is where it's covered
Yes,
in this report,
No, in the health and safety report, in the first report.
in the safety committee minutes.
Yes. And it's 9.1 in this report.
I remember it being raised at safety committee and it hadn't caused an accident or anything like that.
But it sounds like quite a serious incident, even.
Well, it's the fact that it hadn't been properly marked up and you were therefore allowing someone to cut through it.
Yes.
Yeah, no injuries or harm sustained, but it was reported the cable was not clearly marked. Contractor Cadman and Sports Leisure are liaising with Glendale to ensure cables are clearly identified and marked, and that was in the safety committee minutes. I just wanted to remind myself of the date of that meeting. This is what I was trying to suggest, is it's the date of the meeting was May, and therefore it wasn't included in the annual report that ran up to March. But it wouldn't be recorded as an accident because there wasn't an accident.
Do you not have a category for serious incidents with a potential?
We've got incidences and near misses as well. I just
Yeah.
wanted to say it wouldn't come on as an accident, and we will include those where they take place.
I was looking for it as an incident, yes,
Okay.
it's because it's potentially very serious. And I'd wonder whether they would have a process for looking for cables when you're digging in the that sort of project. It's no good waiting for somebody to label it. The actual
Yeah, you sometimes get
system-
sensors and stuff.
Yeah.
I know what you mean. Yeah.
You do it in your own walls at home. So that would be another preventative action, I would have hoped.
Well, yeah, and it seemed to be just making sure that there was proper markage in the first place. That's what came out. But I shall flag to the health and safety officer that we'll be expecting to see that in the Q1 report anyway. Okay,
Okay, thank you.
thank you. Which you'll receive at the next meeting, just to be clear. Yeah. But yeah, I asked the same question actually, where's our near misses and incidents? And it's because they're not actually that commonly reported. It's the accidents that are reported. We don't have lots of incidences in near misses. So yeah, that will be, there will be a column for incident against open play areas section.
Any more questions or comments? Thank you. And right, so we need to look at the recommendation for this item, which is on page 30 of your agenda pack. So it's to consider the annual Health and Safety Report 2022-23, which includes the Health and Safety Q4 statistics, and provide any comments / amendments to the head of HR and OD and the Health and Safety Officer. Do I have a proposer? Thank you, Councillor Buckmaster. And do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Swainston. Can we have a show of hands to indicate all those in favour? All those against? So, that's lovely. Okay, so
And
again,
to reassure you, the comments will be passed on.
so thank you again for those, for that very detailed report. That's very, very helpful. Okay, so our next.
I'm just slightly relieved it was in 2 different periods because I couldn't understand why we hadn't included it, but I thought that was the key answer.
So our next item is item 8, the Human Resources Quarterly Statistics Report, Q4 2022-23, pages 51 to 69, and Emily Caldwell, who's the Human Resources Officer, is going to introduce this.
Thank you, Chair. Just to highlight that this report is statistics showing comparison over the quarters, and that it'll be in more detail in the annual report if you wish to see further detail. Just the main highlights from this report, just on vacancies, there are 37 vacancies, 22 of which were in planning, and you can see further drilling down to the other areas for the remaining 15. The turnover at Q4 rate was 2.9%, and the annual turnover for the year 11.9%, which is also covered further in the annual turnover report. Absence was slightly increased over this quarter and overall annually. L&D in this quarter, just to apologise for the acronyms in this report, and that RIPA stands for Regulation of Investigatory Power Acts, and that PACE stands for Police and Criminal Evidence Act. You can see a highlight of all the courses delivered in that quarter and how many delegates attended.
We normally try and ensure there's no acronyms that aren't explained, but our chair helpfully pointed out there were a couple.
And just to draw your attention to 3.5 on the monitoring indicators, these have been updated, the comparison to local population data for a 2021 census, whereas before they were very old with 2011, so that has been updated in this quarter. And just to bring your attention as well to 4.0 under equalities, there has been a significant increase in the disabled comparison. It's gone from 5 to 13.7. Just to apologise again, the report does say 13.6, but it is 13.7%. And there, just to highlight again, the 2 disabled categories under the Equality Act were disabled day-to-day activities limited a lot, which was 4.9%, and day-to-day activities limited a little. These figures have been added together to get the 13.7, and it's just worth noting that where the activities are limited a lot, it may mean the person is unable to work. Just wanted to highlight that to you.
Because we try and ensure that our makeup reflects the population, and the way that they've done the disability question in the last census was, is there anyone in your household that was disabled? And that came out of a figure of 5%. They've now asked about everyone in the household rather than, so it's individuals. And they've got these two groupings, which it impacts a lot or it impacts a little, but it's still covered as a disability under the Equality Act. The Equality Act actually doesn't define every disability. It defines what is a disability by the fact that it has a substantial impact on day-to-day activities. I just thought it was worth noting, and Emily's obviously just stressed that we may find it difficult to attract people from the limited a lot category, which is 4.9%, because they may be so limited that they're unable to work. That isn't to say that we wouldn't make reasonable adjustments. Just think it's interesting for us to keep an eye on. We were in line with the 5% as an organisation before. Doesn't mean that we won't strive to get higher up on that percentage, but it's just worth recognising. It's a bit like when you compare with age, your under 16s aren't going to be employees, are they? So you've got to have some understanding of that, really.
Thank you.
Happy to take any questions on the quarter four report.
Great. Councillor Depley.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just looking at the number of vacancies, and I can see that planning is very challenging. And I wondered whether or not or whether the council employs fixed term contracts to try and attract people to those roles for a shorter period of time to fill them.
We do recruit to when we advertise the roles, we do offer permanent fixed term working, and we also have agencies that fill the post in the interim, because it's quite hard to recruit to a fixed term position. So where there are vacant posts, they are being covered by agency mainly in the interim until we can recruit to permanent posts. But the option is there. It's not hugely taken up in planning.
Yeah, I think most people do want a permanent opportunity, particularly in local government, because that potentially gives you security of employment. Yeah, I mean, the main initiative that we've used in planning to try and improve the recruitment, which has been brought to this committee and shared with this committee, and it's in line with the pay policy statement that this committee approves and full council approves, is market supplements. So it's the only area where we've started using market supplements. We were previously using golden hellos, which meant you then had to stay for a period of time. If not, you needed to repay it. That wasn't proven to be particularly successful. The team's been restructured to create more layers. We're using career graded jobs. Pretty much everything you can use, we are using. The latest initiative that's being worked through is a different subscription with LinkedIn that actually contacts people that aren't actively seeking work, but that fit your criteria through its algorithms. My only concern with that is I think they're selling that product to everyone. So the main issue is nationally and locally, there is a shortage of planners. And the other issue is that the private sector is taking quite junior planners and putting them into quite senior positions because of this shortage. So we're not even getting the second stage sometimes because they're jumping to stage 3, which obviously will have problems itself as well.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I just wondered, this is something which crops up later on, I think, when we start looking at stress and reasons for absence, but I just wonder what your thoughts are on high levels of vacancies and whether that's impacting on workload and whether that could be a driver for workplace stress.
Absolutely, it's come up at this committee time and time again, and I'm going to give you the answer that you haven't heard before, but it is the correct answer, and Emily's just explained it. Is we're heavily reliant on agency staff to cover vacancies. Actually, one of the problems in planning is that people don't want to come off agency terms because they potentially are more attractive. So actually converting from agency to our own is a real challenge. We've had some success with that. And actually this whole market supplement proposition is based on us actually reducing the agency costs and supplementing that with permanent staff costs with a market supplement. So yes, we're aware that there can be more stress caused and there are backlogs, and there were backlogs caused by the pandemic as well that are still being overcome. But wherever possible, we have got positions covered by agency staff. That's correct, isn't it, Emily?
Councillor Connolly.
Thank you. I think, again, this question might spread into the next report as well, but and again, it's about stress. So I noted you said that there were 5 stress-related long-term absences, and that's kind of resolved because 4 had resigned. do you diagnose people off with stress related, or do you consider work related stress and then the absence as a occupational illness? And one of the I'm asking for concern really for how we manage people who have got long-term stress. And then my second part of that question is, does that leave the council open to a liability of claims against them?
If it's okay, I'll take that one. So the first point is that we use occupational health. If somebody is off with, if someone's off long term for 4 weeks or more, then they're automatically referred to occupational health. If someone's off with stress, then we will consider whether an occupational health referral is helpful at this stage. We have a tool called a stress risk assessment, which is a health and safety exec sort of tool that we've adopted. That is in our sickness policy, so there is no reason to send someone off to Oc Health to be told, do a stress risk assessment. Stress risk assessment looks at what's causing the stress and has a section at the bottom for personal stress. Quite often the doctor's note will indicate whether it's work-related stress or personal stress. I think also should add that a common reason for someone to be signed off with workplace stress is when they're potentially subject to a procedure and therefore they're potentially avoiding the procedure. I wouldn't like to go into detail on individuals, but that could be followed by a resignation. So just wanted to highlight that. In terms of whether it's an occupational illness, what's key is that there is support being provided. So we have an employee assistance program, which is confidential and provides up to 6 face-to-face counselling sessions. We have one-to-ones with staff where they can raise their concerns. And we have that stress risk assessment tool that sets out a full action plan. So you won't be liable for an occupational illness if you can demonstrate you've been reasonable as an employer in terms of the support that you've given. Clearly, if we're getting into the mental health land, which we can, stress itself is not an illness. It's something that leads to other illnesses, but it's often still written on a footnote. But if it leads into mental health and then there are reasonable adjustments, then that's certainly a question that we'll be asking occupational health for their medical opinion and advice on, and that is always followed. So I think that answers both questions. What we have determined at leadership team is because of the high levels of stress and mental health in the wellbeing report overall, that we want to just dig into that data and just see if there are any patterns. There were some suggestions about whether that's maybe fitting particular quality characteristics. Problem is, with the size of organization that we are, you can get into quite dangerous land like that, and potentially it's not really statistically significant. But we are going to have a little look and just see what was it work related, was it personal, how long were they off, what support did they get, that kind of stuff, so that we can see if there's a consistency going on or if there's any patterns or trends that we can identify.
Thank you. I think that would be a really useful exercise, because to keep using the word stress, a lot of things can be in there. But thank you.
And of course, people can self-certify up to 7 days, so it's a difficult one.
Councillor Defley.
Thank you, Chair. Just touching on the liability aspect of my colleague's question. Do you self-insure against tribunal, or do you have an insurance policy against it? And I'm thinking about mental health claims in particular, because they are on a rise in the UK. We've seen it in the private sector a lot. So I wondered how you mitigate that.
We take legal advice where a matter needs legal advice would be the first point, and that's from employment law specialists. To answer your own question, do we currently have an insurance policy that will pay out in relation to tribunals? The answer is no.
Just it might be something to consider, that's all. It depends on the
It's something that I explored when I arrived. We haven't had any successful tribunal claims in the whole time that I've been here, as an example. We did have one that got towards that stage, but was resolved early doors at a very small amount. Yes, we did incur legal fees. I think the view has been that we feel we can defend what does arise without the insurance cover. The insurance cover is not cheap. It's not my decision. It's, I almost feel that this is not the best question to ask in a public forum, if you see what I mean. But yeah, we have good support, but we don't have an insurance product that guarantees any tribunal cost will be met by the insurance product.
Any further questions or comments? Okay. Right, so yes, so the recommendation for the HR committee is to consider the human resources management statistics for Q4, January to March 2023, and provide any comments to the HR officer, stroke head of HR and OD. Do I have a proposer? Thank you, Councillor Connolly, and a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Buckmaster. Can we have a show of hands in favour of the motion? No one against. Okay, so that's carried. Excellent. So moving on, item 9, which is the Learning and Development Review, 2022 to 23, pages 61 to 69 on your pack. So Emily is going to introduce this report. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you, Chair. Just running you through this annual learning and development report. It outlines the budgets we have for the annual year, broken down into central, corporate, and then single service training and development, which is more local training, and professional fees covering sort of degree funded courses, and then health and safety as well. In the table in the report, you'll see a breakdown of all the events we've delivered in the annual year, which is a total of 28 events, and there was 405 delegates throughout those 28 courses. We also launched a new e-learning program in March called Skillgate, which delivers our mandatory training program, which all starters and all employees have to complete mandatory as part of their sort of annual appraisals. And just to go over those, they're equality, diversity and inclusion, data protection. There's one office etiquette and email management, which is every 3 years, which is the only one that's not annual, fire safety and safeguarding. We're also looking at delivering 2 further courses, which were delivered relatively soon actually, on climate change, carbon emissions, sustainability, and one on display screen equipment, which is the assessments which cover health and safety on screens, chairs, mouses, that sort of thing. The service training and development sort of broken down, but it's the same this year as it was last year, and we did underspend professional training and the service training budget as well. We are funding degrees in planning at the moment. On the professional training side, we're funding 2 masters in town planning, and we'll continue to fund those for 23-24. And we're also continuing to fund apprentices from the levy and trainees, so they're outlined in the report as well. I think that's pretty much an overview.
Just one comment to add. When we talk about events, that's where we've put them on in-house. So there used to be local training budgets sitting in the services, but that meant that potentially they could move within their own budgets, move things around. It also meant the bigger teams had sort of more to play with, so that got centralized. But when people go on those individual courses, we don't record all of that. It's recorded locally by the individual who's been on the course. So I just wanted to be clear, there will be individual conferences, there'll be individual training events in addition to what you've just received. What you're receiving is what we've put on corporately, and obviously a big part of that is the e-learning product. And I'd just like to mention that we've brought in a new product, which I know is covered in the report, called Skillsgate, and Emily led on that and has brought us in a really good catalogue of courses. The climate change course is one that's being developed alongside Hertfordshire County Council and other members of the Hertfordshire region. So that's something that's being shared all round. The DSE product that you heard about is not, we already give people the tools to do a DSE assessment. This is training them on good DSE practice and how to look for things, etc. So I'm just highlighting that it's one course, and there is, I think, over 300 courses on this catalogue. We get 10, and then it's a very small amount. I won't share because it's probably commercially sensitive, but it's not a huge amount for another course. And that's for as many people as we wish to provide it to once we do that. So we've got a real rich tapestry now, I think, of e-learning products that it's going to take time for us to customize and tailor and get them exactly where we want to be. But what you're hearing there is sort of some of the early doors on that as well.
Could I just ask what DSE stands for?
That one is so common to us. I do apologize. Display screen equipment. It's basically if you're using a computer. Laptops are the same, as hard desktop computers. That's the display screen equipment, and it's making sure, for example, with a laptop that it's at an appropriate height, separate keyboard, separate mouse, all those sorts of things. If you're doing long-term use, laptops aren't really good to sit on the lap.
Are there any questions or comments? Could I just ask a little bit more about the apprentices and what sort of areas you have apprentices in?
There was one in customer services that just successfully got promoted into customer service advisor. So I think actually now they're more sort of traineeships, where we're funding sort of higher level qualifications at level 5 to 7. They're in planning, strategic finance of property, and I myself completed one as well in HR. So they're the areas.
Thank you, that's very helpful.
I think just to make the committee aware that with the transformation programme and effectively the savings required, we're not taking on level 2 apprentices in the same way that we were in the past. We did have a big drive in planning at one point, weren't able to get many. The planning framework has then become problematic. So sometimes it's about waiting for the right framework as well. We no longer have a separate distinct apprenticeship budget. It's for services to recognise in their areas if this is a potential apprenticeship opportunity. But at this stage in the transformation programme, when you're looking to automate a lot of those junior roles, you don't want to be then taking on apprentices into those junior roles when the roles might not last, or they're displacing potential permanent employees. Permanent employees are being made redundant alongside that. It's not helpful, is it? Because it doesn't feel right. So we are, as Emily said, trying to maximise the levy through higher level funding, and that does mean that the person gets 20% off the job. So just so you're clear, if you're not clear on how apprentices work, the levy is a tax on your payroll that then gives you money to pay for the course. The employment cost of the apprentice is not funded, so you need to employ them, and if that's at a higher level position, then that's obviously on that higher level salary. And then you need to give them 1 day off a week to complete their training. So effectively you're getting 80% of a person, you're paying 100% for them. So yes, it's good to spend the levy, but you spend it wisely. Does that make sense?
And the apprentices that you do take on, are they from the local area? Are they or they come from a wider area?
So I've forgotten the name of the website. All apprentices positions get advertised on the government website, the name, I think it's called the apprenticeship portal. Emily's obviously applied on this once upon a time, but all of our apprentices positions go on that. And you tend to get local people looking for the apprenticeship opportunities that are local, because there tend to be people that are still living at home, if you see what I mean, rather than upwardly mobile. But we advertise predominantly on the web, so obviously it's World Wide Web in that sense. Anyone can look.
Thank you. Right, any more questions or comments? Okay, so the recommendation is for the committee to consider the learning and development review for 2022-23 and provide any comments. So can I have a proposer? Thank you, Councillor Smith, and a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Wilcox. Can we have a show of hands to indicate support? But none against. So that motion is carried. Okay, so we're moving on to item 10 now, which is the annual turnover report 2022-23, pages 70 to 89. So if I can just hand over to Simon again, thank you very much.
As Emily highlighted, there is crossover with the Q4 report. This goes into much more detail and depth and obviously looks at previous years, and also talks about the vacancies and recruitment costs. Key thing, I guess, to start with is that turnover is down. Turnover, sorry, I'm trying to see the screen and speaking to the microphone. Sorry, I can't see my screen very well. Yeah, so turnover last year was 14.5%. It's come down to 11.9% this year. You will also note that the year previous it was 8.4. Sorry, the green color is just struggling on my eyes. 8.4%. And what I wanted to explain there is we saw, like most people saw, that during the pandemic, people didn't leave. And then there was some quite big changes, sometimes complete relocations, retirements. And that's why last year's figure was quite high. There was a lot of retirements in there. You can see that in the report last year, should you wish to check that. But coming down to 11.9 is positive. We only have a local government average of 14% at the moment because they tend to be a year behind in terms of publishing. I would expect that the sector average has probably dropped as well. But considering we are sort of shrinking and there are, you know, we are keeping vacancies, etc., for savings. 11.9%, I think, is a healthy turnover figure. Voluntary turnover itself was 10.3%. The reasons for leaving don't cause any real concern and are consistent with the employment sector. And there is a fair number that are leaving us to achieve promotion, which is something that's healthy for the organisation. Being the size that we are, we will lose people because there aren't the layers necessarily for them to progress to. The stability rate is positive at 91%. That measures how many people are leaving in their first year. So it's only 9% that are leaving in their first year. And that isn't necessarily a bad thing if there's a problem in probation, for example. The voluntary turnover is also shown by service area. I don't think there's really anything to highlight there. The figure that jumps off the page is a very small team, so that's why you're dealing with quite a high figure. It is positive to see that the planning turnover has come down. Just to note that. Moving through in terms of the exit questionnaire analysis, I think you'll agree that we've got some really positive results on our exit questionnaire analysis, in particular, where people 100% of the 24 employees that completed the questionnaire would recommend the council to others. And the other one that certainly, well, there was quite a few that stood out, but the other one that I wanted to highlight was where we give a rating. Yeah, especially positive to see 100% of respondents would recommend. It's also reflected in 96% of respondents rating the council as an employer at 7 or above, with 25% actually rating it 10 out of 10. So that was pretty impressive. My slight concern is we may not see such good results again because they are very good results, but there we are. Vacancy rate, we're also at 11.9%. That is lower than the English authorities, but again, that figure is a year old, so you know, you have to take that with a slight pinch of salt. Our vacancy rate has gone up from 8.5 to 11.9, and a lot of that is the planning restructure that I've talked about. 10 posts in addition to the 37 vacant posts that Emily's already talked about have been deleted and given up for saving, and that's set out as 4 posts in finance and property, 4 in housing and health, and 2 in Revs and Bens. We still have a number of positions on hold where we look at service restructuring, and the recruitment costs have gone up this year, but they're not at the high level they were at 18-19. And we're still below what is seen as the average in the employment sector, where that is suggested to be at least £1,000. The main reason for the addition, sorry, £1,500 now, my apologies, the Chartered Institute of Personnel says that's the average cost to recruit. Our average cost is £782. Most of that, well, almost half of the cost this year is on planning. And we've done some substantial video campaigns, big press advertisements to try and reach what is a very challenging area. So in terms of actions that we took last year to improve recruitment, we've introduced an applicant tracking system, which is known as an ATS, from a company called Web Recruit. That now means that basically the candidate experience is improved because they can apply online, they can get help from Web Recruit as well as from ourselves should they need it. And then more important, well, not more importantly for the organization, you set up what are known as hiring managers on the job, and then those applications go directly into the hiring manager. They can start looking at applications before the closing date should they wish to. And then where we've got lots of positions, for example, in planning, we've been using that. So we've started interviewing people before the closing date because we know we've got more than one job. So we're obviously trying to be sensible in that regard. Shortlisting is done online, and then the emails are sent by the system. So no longer do we have that phrase that says, if you haven't heard from us in 3 weeks, assume you've been unsuccessful. You'll get an email saying you've been unsuccessful, which is more polite. Especially if for some reason shortlisting has taken longer than 3 weeks, that can be quite problematic. But we are looking at recruitment standards being developed next year, which I'll come on to. We have determined that the onboarding element of the ATS system isn't really fit for purpose for us. So we're still doing that really by our HR officer, doing that all on email. It is paperless. We don't send lots of paper out. But the ATS doesn't allow us to have approval and manipulation of contracts that we would like. So that's why we partly decided not to do it. It also doesn't interfere directly into our HR system. So there was always going to be a cost involved in that anyway. The other area that hasn't progressed as we hoped it to last year, which we have raised at this committee before, is name blind recruitment. So basically the product works now that you have a CV and then you have what's known as the application form, but the application form doesn't ask you to replicate everything on the CV. So we've improved the candidate experience by having a CV and then what we call part 2, which is where you address the person spec, put your references on, those sorts of things, do the equality information, which is then detached before the managers see it, etc. But when the name blind recruitment was turned on, and in fact, we tested it on Emily's CV, but that doesn't really matter. You could not see any qualifications. For some reason, it wiped out all of the qualifications that were on the CV. It also wiped out some other data. So basically, it was blinding too much information. They're currently testing a new solution. If the solution works, we will implement it. You know, it's not, there hasn't been anything in our equality stats from a recruitment point of view to suggest that there is bias, but obviously name blinding takes the opportunity to remove any suggestion. So that's why we are keen to implement it. I've used it at other organizations, you know, you just turn a name into a candidate number instead. HR can still see the full names, but the hiring manager can't. The problem, as I say, is that the technology isn't quite as good as it was suggested to be. So we've got this ATS product on the basis of spending a minimum amount on advertising, which is very successful for us. So we aren't actually paying for the system. So we kind of have to work with their development schedules when they're doing things, or we need to go out and spend a lot more money on maybe another system. So it's a work in progress, but it's been a real improvement. And there's definitely benefits for both candidates and for the organization, which I've set out. We have also updated our job section on the website. We have, in terms of retaining staff, been promoting our health and wellbeing program to staff. We've improved our staff recognition scheme. In fact, just because Emily mentioned it, her final project for her level 5 CIPD was to relaunch our employee award scheme and make it more interesting and engaging, which it has achieved. So we've got 4 categories rather than an employee of the month, and then an annual award ceremony where people vote. So it's a lot more engaging, nice photos on the intranet. If you're ever on the intranet, you can see the employee award section. It's very nice. What we want to do is get some of that information onto our external website as well, so that people can see that what happens internally and get a bit more of an insight. We've got case studies on there already. They're going to be looked at for further review. As I say, we'll implement name blind recruitment should it be successfully working. And the other addition in terms of recruitment intention that is taking place this year. And so I've just noticed that I think the wrong year is on section 11. My apologies.
Yeah, it should say 23, 24. So apologies, I'll correct that on the main paper, but I'm talking about next year's actions now. Section 11, and I was just saying that we will continue with the market supplements where we need to, in line with the pay policy statement. We are going to carry on onboarding as such through HR rather than through the system. We actually feel that we risk candidates dropping out if we were to sort of use the system too much. When you've got a big machine, it makes some sense, but people don't like having to log on to this portal and do this and do that. It's much easier if they've got someone supporting them and giving them that personal touch. So we prefer that personal touch. We recruit about 60 positions a year, so that does make sense. We're going to look at the 4 case studies. We've also had a review by what's known as the Lean Six Sigma team. So Lean Six Sigma is where you look for lean processes, predominantly in manufacturing. So we've got a number of people that are green belts, if that means anything to anyone, but that's a certain status. They had a look at our recruitment process and made recommendations, which we've adopted. They found that between closing date and interview, we had an average of 20.5 working days, which is not acceptable. That isn't what we expect, and there were some quite long cases that really changed that average, I do want to say. But what we've determined is we need to have a clear standard that basically said shortlisting should be done within a week, and then you should be interviewing the following week. You should be advertising on your advert when you're going to be doing the interviewing as well, so that we're sort of focused the minds, hopefully get the availability. You know, you can always change those dates, but it's just getting things moving along. So Claire Kirby, who's the other HR officer, is looking at this. We've already got step-by-step guidance, but we're going to put sort of expectations in terms of timeframes against those steps. And then we're going to send it to the managers and say, do you buy into this? Do you accept this? Because recruitment is devolved to the managers. So it's not HR that are holding up that process, is really what I want to say. And that's not, we're one team, of course, but, you know, we need to identify where there's the issues and improve that. The other thing was making the induction process more online. So we're looking at sort of creating more video content, which means we currently run a corporate induction potentially monthly, but probably more likely quarterly, because we try and run it when there's sufficient numbers to make it more worthwhile. But that might mean that someone's waiting 3 months for the corporate induction. There is other induction, there is local induction, but we're talking about getting videos maybe from each head of service, giving an overview of their service, and then people accessing that earlier on, just helping improve that recruitment process. Oh, we've got an impressive induction. You know, you can lose people in the induction stage. You know, they say probation is a two-way process. Most people don't, you know, once they've gone into a job, they tend to stick to it, but really people are deciding if you are what they expected you to be. So, you know, you want to have a good induction, and you definitely want to have an IT account that's working from day one, which was also a problem. So that's been flagged. Medium to long term, and this may not be possible. They want us to see if we can record when someone withdraws, why they withdrawn. Difficulty with that is we don't always know. People aren't that polite. Sometimes people just don't turn up, and you could send them a few emails saying, why didn't you turn up? And we know the answer is because I've got another job and I'm not interested anymore, and potentially you don't get any response back. But where we can, we are going to record that. We can certainly, when we've made a formal offer and it's declined, we do know why that is then declined. Whether we can record that in the ATS, we're going to investigate. That's one of the more medium terms. And the final thing was to look at using the onboarding element of the ATS. And as I've already rehearsed, that isn't really suitable for us, so we won't be doing that. But we have agreed with the Lean Six Sigma team that they have a look at these standards once we've produced and give us any comments on that as well. So it's been helpful having them give us that insight. So they're the actions that we're proposing for next year. And obviously, not obviously, I did say this earlier, this has been through leadership team and they have accepted these actions. And it was in fact the leadership team that asked to dig in more further to the stress and mental health stuff, which will be coming in the next report.
Thank you very much. Are there any comments or questions on that report? Councillor Smith.
Thank you. I was just interested in the 10 posts that have been deleted, and whether that was for cost savings or whether that was because those posts were no longer required.
Sorry, I suppose the short answer is it's for both reasons, because in order to determine that you can make the saving, you are determining that you don't require it anymore. Yeah, originally the posts were put on hold for example, a number of posts were put on hold because they had the potential to move into the corporate support hub, which was always looking to bring all administration together and therefore get economies of scale. So the good news is there isn't any redundancies proposed in that move at the moment. It's because we've kept the vacancies vacant, that then that's where the saving can come from. So yeah, it's a combination of the two. Sometimes work's being reorganized. This is all in line really with the transformation program where it used to be that if you had the budget as a head of service, you can go out and recruit. Now you have to have approval from the recruitment panel, which is the chief exec, the deputy chief exec, the section 151 officer, as in head of finance, and myself. So everything is scrutinized. And we do look at, for example, is it better to take someone on a fixed term basis before a project potentially is then going to start? So therefore it's quite clear that it's ended for the reason that it has, as opposed to it's getting caught up with all of the other restructuring redundancy side. Because you obviously have to treat fixed term workers the same as everyone else.
I think my concern from having seen how it's occasionally does work in different organisations is that the people that are then having to step up, and whether that would be the case if people are having to cover that workload, and that is managed kind of carefully, I guess. Again, it's looking forward at the stress statistics. And
yeah, no, all I can reassure, yeah, we are in difficult times. I don't think you can avoid stress altogether. I do want to be really frank and honest in that regard. And there will be people that will be taking on more than they used to, potentially being regraded as part of that. So it's not all bad news. And obviously developing a wider range of skills potentially makes them more marketable elsewhere. So there are benefits to some of the stuff that we are doing for the individuals. And obviously there is full consultation with the trade union. And recently there was a consultation that took place in the finance area. And the suggestions that were made by the staff in terms of how to tweak the process and maybe not quite reduce that or to retain a position there, they were taken on board. So that's all I can say is there's meaningful consultation, but it is difficult times.
Any more comments or questions? Okay, thank you very much. Our recommendation is as follows: to consider the annual turnover report 2022-23, including the actions in section 11 planned for 2023-24, and provide any comments to the head of HR and OD. Do I have a proposer? Thank you, Councillor Buckmaster. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Swainston. Can we have a show of hands to indicate whether you support the motion? Okay, I think that's carried. Thank you very much. So now we're on to our last report, which is the Employee Health and Wellbeing Report 2022-23, pages 90 to 112. So again, if I can hand over to Simon just to introduce this report.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to give credit to Claire Kirby, the HR officer that wrote the report, and for the team. Obviously, again, it's been through me, and I'm happy to take any questions. The key headlines I think Emily's already shared is, unfortunately, we have seen an increase in our sickness levels. That isn't uncommon in comparison to the sector, but I think in terms of the general employment market, they are lower in terms of their average days than us. So we did reduce the level from 6.5 days to 6 days. I can't remember the precise year, but I think it was 2020. It is in the report. But yeah, this is the first year where we've exceeded the target of 6. And yeah, a big part of that, as you can see, is due to mental health illness and stress, which we do know as a country has been a particular issue that has been furthered by the pandemic and isolation and so on. I think it's why we're quite keen on what we call blended working and the importance of having 50% time in the office and having that interaction with colleagues. Obviously, we're making sure that people also have that interaction through video, etc., when they are working through home. The causes for short-term absence have got a 12% for stress, but the most common reason is minor illnesses, and that's the same as other employers, that's in their top 3.
in terms of long-term absence, so we have the East Hart's target is 2 days and we've gone to 2.8. So we're 0.8 over on that. And sorry, I should have done the short-term one in the same way, where the target was 4 days and we've hit 4.7. So it's in the 1.5 is pretty much evenly spread between long-term and short-term sickness being increased. I think we've already answered questions about what support do we provide and how do we support staff, and that is all covered in the report. Section 5, how is the council addressing employee absence? And then we've got the ongoing support that we're providing. I was sharing with the chair that on the intranet, should you wish to view it, there is some excellent resilience training we bought from a company called Art of the Brilliant, where they study what's known as positive mental health, as opposed to why do people become ill? How do we make them better? What stops people becoming ill? What traits do they have? How do they have the resilience? So there's some really excellent video training sessions that we've been able to keep for the time being, at least. So please go on and have a look at those, because they are useful. The previous committee was quite interested in things like how we bounce back. There's some cracking titles anyway. I'm not going to quote them all. They're actually in this wellbeing report, so you can see that. Let me tell you what I'm talking about. I've just realized they're all in here. So yeah, deliver the resilience program that I'm referring to is 7.3 in the report. So from mental health to mental wealth, the why factor, rediscovering your purpose, self-care, it's all about you. Do you see what I mean? Some real punchy titles and some excellent presenters, actually. So I would highly recommend that as something to have a look at. And we are re-promoting that to all of our staff so that they can access it. We had about 30, 40 people on each video call, but we didn't get enough people doing it, despite offering work time, etc. That's why we've made sure the videos are republished so people can pick them up at a later stage. There is a review has taken place of our blended work arrangements. Generally, there's support for it to carry on as is, but to be supported by a blended work policy, which has been drafted for the chief exec's consideration, and then it will progress through the relevant channels. And generally, staff responses in terms of our health and well-being and also blended work, they feel that they are well supported, and the council does take a good interest in their well-being. So this is positive stuff. There has been some reductions in terms of the community team in housing and health. They used to help with what's known as live well, work well. That post has gone as a saving. There are other community programs still being done, but they don't have that inward look. So it's down to HR really to promote things like mental health days, some articles and signposting. So we're really keen to make sure that our wellbeing section on the intranet has lots of signposting, lots of good resources, and that we regularly promote that basically through the communications team. So that's the main action that we'll be taking next year. If there's any questions, happy to take them.
Councillor Swainston.
I was just wondering how confident you are that the minor illnesses are minor illnesses and not stress. So I guess I'm asking, are people comfortable with owning up to stress within this organisation?
I think it's a good question. It's one that's hard to answer with complete certainty. I think I have to say that up front. You know, if somebody lists that you have the reason minor illness from the drop down list and then you explain what it is, there is equally a drop down option called stress, so they can choose stress. As I said, I think we all know that stress can be personal, and it can be, you know, you can have stress from a bereavement, and people are sometimes signed off with stress following a bereavement, for example. Obviously, or other family events can cause stress. So I think the short answer is we have to accept that when people self-certify, we're asked to self-certify honestly. So in terms of how confident I'm as confident as I can be that people are filling out forms correctly. In terms of stress, when we rewrote the sickness absence procedures 2 years ago now, we included the full stress risk assessment
tool in there so that it's visible to everyone. It's not something that's, so you can ask to undertake that as an individual at any point. We've got an employee assistance program. We promote that. We've done lots of signposting to wellbeing stuff as well. And so I'd like to, I think we can give all the tools and we can certainly signpost people, but you can't force people to follow it all, can you, if you see what I mean? And, you know, the last thing I would mention is that we do have one-to-ones and there is opportunity, you know, the question, how are you, is asked.
Councillor Wilcox.
Apologies, if this is answered somewhere else, but in the causes of long-term absence, we can see that stress and mental health are over 40%. Is there a year-on-year comparison to see whether that's actually growing year on year, or is it?
Last year's report will have the comparison in there. We don't compare year on year like that. But what we have said is we're going to look into that 40% with leadership team. And I think it's an obvious thing to also have a look at how does it compare to last year as part of that process.
Thank you.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you. One of the figures that I spotted was under the significant challenges that people had reported, 41% of people said demanding workload was the most significant challenge. But in the actions planned for next year, there's nothing really explicitly kind of looking at that. So if that's what employees are feeding back as the big, really big problem, I'm just wondering if there's anything more that can be done to look into that.
Just want to say that when employees leave, they fill in the exit questionnaire, and that is fed back to the service manager and head of service, so they are aware of reasons for leave and any comments they've made within that, so they take it back within their service. Just make you aware of that.
I think to answer, I wanted to just get the context because I had the same feeling when I was reviewing this report, but you have to look at what was the question being asked, and they said, what's your biggest challenge? But elsewhere, when you said, I feel the council supports my well-being, 85% of employees said that it does. 86% gave a rating of 6 out of 10 for their current working arrangements. I mean, a demanding workload in a council is always the case, is what I would really argue. So all we can do is make sure that we have supervision, we have support in place. You know, one of the things that you would expect someone to do as a manager is help people prioritize, agree different deadlines. That stuff all happens. So I think the reason why there hasn't been a specific action is you can't suddenly employ a load of extra people because we don't have the money for that. All we can do is support staff with their workload and help them prioritize and help them manage it. Yeah, and as I say, the question that was asked is, what is your biggest challenge? And I think if I remember right, we gave them choices as well, if you see what I mean. And most people are going to tick demanding workload. Just being frank, I mean, you also had 12% of people being concerned about the health and well-being of their loved ones, which is clearly something that we weren't able to control and support, other than making sure that we had good COVID protocols. All of our COVID risk assessments went through the union and were brought into, I think staff knew that we took that all very seriously. And sometimes the demanding workload is partly because we weren't able to get out and do certain things that we would normally do because of those restrictions. I mean, the main reassurance I can give you is that staff have PDRs and they have one-to-ones and all of those other tools that I've just highlighted. Yeah, I'm not sure, unless I'm open to suggestions if you think there is a particular action we should take, but it's really down to good line management.
No, I don't think there's a sort of any specific kind of action that you can take, but I think if you're asking those questions, then it needs strategies to kind of especially if you're asking that question, it has to be taken on board, doesn't it? We have to take that feedback as it is.
Yeah, no, this was quite an old report now, and it went to leadership team, and there was communication back out to staff following that.
Okay,
Yeah.
brilliant. And then just one other thing, which was about mental health first aid training, which sounds like it could have been something that was possibly a pre-COVID thing. And I don't know, is it like that there's refresher training coming up for mental health first aid? Is that a program?
But basically, we had a big drive on it, I think about 5-6 years ago, before my time. A number of staff that were mental health first aiders, their pictures around the wall, so people know who is a mental health first aider. But we don't have any special badge or anything, do we? No. At one point, sorry, it might be a previous organisation. But yeah, the mental health first aiders are visible to people, but the numbers have dwindled. So that's what we're saying, is we need to restock, if that makes sense. There's no incentive for anyone, so you are sort of subject to volunteers. Yeah, what I've said is an action is we need to look at that again and then obviously if we can get some more people to say they're willing to do it, then we need to get them trained.
I think that's a really good initiative, because it is something that is, like you say, there's only so much you can do to make people actually take advantage of initiatives, but that is something which, when you've got people on the ground in the offices keeping an eye on people, I think that's something that's really helpful. So I'm really pleased to see that that's a thing.
Yeah, no, I equally, I thought it was a thing to celebrate when I arrived that we have mental health first aiders as well as first aiders. So yeah.
Any more questions? Councillor Connolly.
Sticking with that theme, has any work been done on what indicators we'd look for to show that we've gone as far as we can go in terms of staff reductions? I mean, because Six Sigma can keep going round and round, can't it? So, you know, what would we look for to say we can't go any further? You know, this is the impact it's having on staff and work and whatever else, but most stress and
Well, I think if Richard was here, what he would say is the vision is to protect frontline services. So where possible, we don't want to reduce staff. We want to make sure that we're providing a service that the customers want, but at the same time, there isn't the same money available to do everything. So it is, again, calling priorities. I don't think there is a set measure. In the end, you are making a decision, and then you will be taking stock, won't you, after that decision's been made. You know, as an example, we had a dedicated insurance post. It's then how can that post be served through different means? So it's not to say that anything's been cut full stop. It's things are reducing and there are maybe less to do it. There isn't. I think if you're in a manufacturing or maybe an engineering type environment, and you know that in order to do this number of jobs, you need this number of people, it becomes a lot easier. We're in more of a service and support and advisory roles in a lot of what we do. So I think, the shared service in Revs and Bends is obviously a shared service as well. There's a lot of staff in there. Blended working is something that we've obviously been keen to ensure that we can help recruit and attract. Yeah, there are reductions being made, and things won't be, I think some services that may have been gold standard will not be gold standard anymore because we can't afford to do a gold standard. That's the reality. But no, to answer your question, which I don't think I've done very well at, is that there is no set tool to say how far you can reduce. The service reviews will be making an argument, and the business case that comes out of those will be making an argument as to why this can work. And if people then suggest back, as I've said, well, actually you could do something here, or you could make a bit more of a saving there, we are open to that.
yes, thank you. I get that. I think my concern is also on the impact on staff. So are we looking for measures like 40% stress and mental health in our long-term absence? That becomes an indicator that we've taken staff cutbacks possibly as far as we can go, because we're starting to impact people's health. It's that sort of conversation.
I think it would be fair to say at this stage that the main reductions, okay, you've seen 10 posts go, but there hasn't been the service reviews that I'm talking about. The one in planning, for example, didn't lead to any redundancies. The corporate support hub one is being worked on at the moment. The finance one, yes, there are some redundancies, but the service review and the business case is supposed to set out how the service is going to work with this reduced team and why it's going to work. But obviously it also says, and we need to make this amount of saving. So it's a balance, really. I don't think a tool exists that says this is the far as you can go. It's down to the managers and the people in that service to make the arguments, if you see what I mean, and for them to be considered.
I mean, yeah, that probably sounds a bit crude to put it that way, but as far as we could go, but almost a risk assessment question, you know, what's the impact on our staff's health of this and this, that sort of conversation. Okay, perhaps it's not been had.
That hasn't taken place. I mean, you can potentially use the health and safety exec stress assessment to review stress across the whole organisation, but there hasn't been any decision to do that at this stage.
Maybe we can look at that data ongoing then, and going back a year or two, the stress and the.
Well, so I think what you're saying is when we do the analysis on the stress and mental health stuff for leadership team, you'd like to see that. We'll make some comparisons to the previous year, yeah, definitely. But I'm just finding the platform. So I think what we're saying is in the next Q1 report, we'll have an addendum to just say what the deep dive, if I can call it that, led to.
Yeah.
I am pre-warning that there may not be any obvious patterns because of the numbers that we are talking about. And as I said to you, there will certainly be at least one case, and I don't know if there's more, where they've been off with stress because they've been asked to attend a formal hearing. And you will always get a proportion of that. It's why when you go to Oc Health in that state, it's not just the question is, are you fit to work, but are you fit to attend a hearing? Because obviously if the hearing itself is causing you stress, which it will do, the only way that stress will end is by concluding the matter. Fortunately, that isn't always what people want, but yeah.
Councillor Wilcox.
Sorry, just one more question. This is one from a private sector question, but I don't know if any of our staff are obligated to work from home or if do blended working, but is there any consideration taken to their wider working environment? So I know a display screen equipment, a DSC would be your desk and your screen and perhaps that, but is there anything around their workspace at home being noise or privacy or interference? Is that taken into consideration as well?
Yeah, so the original way we approached blended working is we made people an offer. So first of all, there was no obligation to take it. And if you wanted to work 5 days a week in the office because you didn't have a suitable home working environment, you could. Staff were asked to do an assessment to demonstrate that they do have a suitable environment. They had to confirm that they had the sufficient internet access because that's obviously down to them to provide. Yeah, we don't provide the desk so that they had a suitable table to operate from. So yeah, what we haven't done, I know some organizations have done this, but we haven't said, oh, because you haven't got a great internet connection, we'll buy you a Wi-Fi booster. We've been limited because obviously one, we are limited in terms of resources. We don't pay a home working allowance. That was something that we did prior to all of this, but because now everyone is effectively, or the vast majority, as I said, there are some fully site-based positions, caretakers being an obvious example. We've ensured that they've got the sufficient, initially in the pandemic, people took their chairs home so that they could use their chairs, etc. But we haven't been, so people have to provide the desk and we provide pretty much everything else.
Thank you.
Just got one last question on this topic, which is particularly again in relation to blended working. So are there opportunities for the staff to make informal social networks if they're spending a lot of time at home? How do they build those networks?
So that's why we're a big advocate of it being 50-50. There are some staff that would like it to be 40% in the office because then it's a clean 2 days for them rather than this 2/3 days that they potentially have to do when they're full time. That hasn't been supported by the chief exec certainly, it's important that obviously people are fully contactable on all the various systems. So that team meetings are sometimes held in a hybrid basis. In fact, we did a HR team meeting just a couple of weeks ago where one person was on Teams, everyone else was in the room. So there is the short answer is we ensure that there's interaction by but we're not allowing people to effectively be so home based that they don't get that interaction. In Revs and Bens, they've got other tools where they're constantly talking to each other, and they have all their meetings on video, for example, because the team's so big. So there are differences within some teams, but in terms of making sure that people can build social interactions, the other thing I should stress is that when new starters join, we do ask them to work more days in the office than potentially they will do long term. And the team, or certainly I can talk about my own team, HR, we would all make sure that one of us is in every day to support the new starter. Do you see what I mean? So it is a challenge. And that's why that video content that I talked about for induction is important as well, so that you can get more of that happening sooner and more accessible.
Yes, thank you very much for that. I suppose what I'm thinking is that obviously, particularly for, as you say, for new starters, that social relations are really important for motivation and feeling part of an organisation. So having opportunities for that for all staff is I think quite a valuable thing to bear in mind. So are there any, oh, sorry, I need to focus. So the recommendation is, unless there are any other comments or questions, is to consider the annual employee health and wellbeing report 2022-23, including the actions in section 8 planned for 2023-24, and provide any comments to the head of HR and OD. So do I have a proposer? Councillor Buckmaster. Thank you. And a seconder, Councillor Wilcox. Can we have a show of hands to indicate support for the motion? I think that's unanimous, so that's carried. Thank you very much again for your introduction and for all the work on these on this report. Right, so urgent business is the last item, and as I understand it, there are no urgent items, and so that concludes tonight's meeting at 8:23.